The fire crackles low in the center of the shelter, its smoke curling upward through a gap in the hide-covered roof, leaving behind a haze that stings the eyes and coats the lungs. Around the flames, a family sleeps together on a floor of packed earth, their bodies pressed close for warmth, their skin unwashed for weeks, perhaps months. A dog lies among them, its fur matted with mud and crawling with fleas. Outside, a pile of refuse grows slowly, larger bones, rotting scraps, human waste. The smell is something no modern person could tolerate for more than a few minutes. In the corner of the shelter, a child stirs. Her face is streaked with grime. Her fingernails are black with dirt. When she wakes, she will eat with those hands, placing food directly into her mouth without a second thought. Later, she will play in the mud outside, where animals have defecated, where parasites wait in the soil, where bacteria thrive in numbers beyond counting. By every standard we hold today, this child should be dead within the year. And yet, she will live. She will grow strong. She will bear children of her own. She will survive into old age. And when she dies, it will not be from infection, not from disease, not from the filth that surrounds her every waking moment. This is the paradox that modern science struggles to explain. This is the truth that contradicts everything we believe about survival. We live in an age where cleanliness is not merely encouraged but demanded. From the moment we are born, we are scrubbed, sanitized, and protected from the invisible world of microorganisms. We wash our hands before meals. We sterilize our surfaces. We filter our water and pasteurize our milk. We have been taught, generation after generation, that dirt is dangerous, that germs are the enemy, that the path to health runs through soap and disinfectant, and the relentless elimination of everything unseen. This belief is so deeply embedded in our culture that we rarely question it. Cleanliness, we assume, is what separates civilization from barbarism. It is what allows us to live longer, healthier, more productive lives. It is, in essence, one of the defining achievements of human progress. And yet, for the vast majority of human existence, none of this was true. For tens of thousands of years, our ancestors lived in conditions that would horrify any modern health official. They drank from streams where animals bathed and defecated. They ate meat that had been sitting in open air for days. They slept on ground that crawled with insects. They shared their living spaces with livestock, with vermin, with parasites of every description. They did not wash their hands. They did not boil their water. They did not understand the concept of contamination, and they survived. Not merely survived, thrived. They spread across continents. They adapted to every climate on Earth. They built the foundations of every civilization that would follow. They did all of this while living in what we would call squalor, surrounded by biological threats that should have decimated their populations over and over again. How is this possible? How did humanity persist through millennia of exposure to pathogens that modern medicine considers deadly? How did our ancestors avoid the plagues and epidemics that would later devastate far more advanced societies? The answer lies in understanding something that our modern obsession with sterility has caused us to forget. The human body was never designed to exist in isolation from the microbial world. It was designed to engage with it, to learn from it, to build defenses through constant, low-level exposure. The immune system is not a wall, it is a student. And for most of human history, it had excellent teachers. When a child in a prehistoric community crawled through dirt, picked up food from the ground, and placed it in her mouth, she was not simply inviting disease. She was training her body to recognize threats, to develop responses, to build a library of defenses that would protect her for the rest of her life. Every parasite she encountered, every bacterium that entered her system, every virus that challenged her developing immunity, these were not simply dangers, they were lessons. This process, refined over millions of years of evolution, created human beings whose immune systems were extraordinarily robust. They could tolerate levels of microbial exposure that would overwhelm a modern body. They could host parasites without succumbing to them. They could drink contaminated water and emerge unscathed. Their bodies had learned, through countless generations of trial and adaptation, how to coexist with the invisible world. And then, something changed. Approximately 12,000 years ago, humans began to settle. They stopped following the herds, stopped moving with the seasons, and started building permanent homes. They domesticated animals and kept them close. They stored food in quantities never before imagined. They gathered together in numbers that would have seemed impossible to their wandering ancestors. This was the agricultural revolution, and it transformed every aspect of human existence. It allowed populations to grow. It created surplus wealth. It laid the groundwork for cities, for writing, for everything we call civilization. But it also did something else, something unforeseen, something that would haunt humanity for millennia to come. In permanent settlements, waste accumulated. Human refuse that would have been left behind during migration now piled up in the same places where people ate, slept, and raised their children. Animals that had once roamed freely were now penned in close quarters, their diseases mixing with human diseases in ways that had never occurred before. Food that had been consumed immediately was now stored, creating breeding grounds for new forms of contamination. And critically, humans began to stay in one place long enough for pathogens to establish themselves, to evolve, to specialize in attacking human hosts. The wandering life had offered a form of protection that no one recognized at the time. By moving constantly, early humans escaped the buildup of their own biological waste. They left parasites behind. They outpaced diseases that might otherwise have consumed them. Movement was medicine, though they did not know it. Settlement ended that protection. And with its end came a new era in human health, one marked not by resilience, but by vulnerability. The first great plagues emerged not among primitive hunter-gatherers, but among settled agricultural peoples. The first epidemics swept not through nomadic camps, but through permanent villages and early cities. The transition to civilization was, paradoxically, a transition toward disease on a scale never before experienced. And this is where the story becomes truly strange. Because as populations grew and suffered, as plagues began to decimate communities with terrifying regularity, humans responded in the only way they knew how. They tried to clean up. Early attempts at sanitation were not entirely ineffective. Removing waste from immediate living areas did reduce certain threats, but these efforts were incomplete, haphazard, and often misdirected. Without understanding the true nature of disease, without knowing that invisible organisms were the cause, humans could not target their efforts effectively. They cleaned what they could see and ignored what they could not. More importantly, their cleaning efforts began to disrupt the very process that had protected their ancestors for so long. Immune systems that had been trained by constant exposure began to encounter fewer challenges. Bodies that had coexisted with parasites for generations suddenly found themselves hosting them in smaller numbers, or not at all. The balance that evolution had carefully maintained, a balance between human and microbe, host and parasite, began to shift. And when it shifted, humans did not become healthier, they became more vulnerable. The evidence for this shift is written in the bones of our ancestors. Archaeologists examining skeletal remains from the transition period, the centuries immediately following the adoption of agriculture, have found disturbing patterns. Heights decreased, bone density declined, dental health deteriorated. Signs of nutritional deficiency appeared with increasing frequency, and markers of infectious disease became dramatically more common. These were not the bones of people living better lives. These were the bones of people struggling to survive in a world their bodies no longer understood. Paradoxically, the communities that maintained higher levels of exposure, those that continued to live in close contact with animals, with soil, with the full spectrum of environmental microorganisms, often fared better than those that attempted early forms of sanitation. Their immune systems remained active, remained trained, remained capable of responding to threats. They paid a price in chronic parasitic infection, in constant low-level illness, but they avoided the catastrophic epidemics that swept through cleaner communities. This pattern repeated itself throughout human history, though no one at the time understood why. Populations that seemed to live in the most primitive conditions often demonstrated remarkable resistance to diseases that devastated their more advanced neighbors. Isolated communities that had never adopted formal sanitation practices sometimes survived plagues that killed half the inhabitants of nearby cities. The explanation seemed impossible. The connection seemed backward. How could filth protect while cleanliness killed? And yet, the evidence accumulated. Bones told stories, settlement patterns revealed truths, and slowly, over centuries and millennia, a picture emerged of human health that contradicted every assumption we hold dear. The human immune system requires challenge. It requires exposure. It requires the constant presence of potential threats in order to maintain its vigilance and effectiveness. Remove those threats entirely, and the system does not simply rest, it atrophies. It forgets. It becomes incapable of responding when genuine danger arrives. This is not a flaw in human design. It is a feature of an organism evolved in a world of constant biological challenge. Our ancestors did not need clean environments because their bodies were built for dirty ones. They did not need sterile conditions because their immune systems were built to handle contamination. The extraordinary defenses we inherited were forged in filth, tested by parasites, refined by millennia of exposure to everything modern hygiene seeks to eliminate. When we began to clean our world, we did not simply remove danger. We removed the training ground that made us strong. Consider the great plagues of later history, the epidemics that swept through medieval cities, the waves of disease that accompanied colonization and conquest, the deadly outbreaks that killed millions in populations that, by the standards of their time, were relatively sophisticated. These populations had achieved levels of sanitation and infrastructure that would have seemed miraculous to prehistoric humans. They had waste removal systems, they had water supplies, they had rules and regulations about cleanliness, and yet they died in numbers that would have astonished their distant ancestors. The reason is now clear. Their immune systems had been compromised by their own progress. Generations of reduced exposure had produced bodies less capable of fighting infection. The very efforts they made to protect themselves had created vulnerability. They had become strangers to the microbial world, and when that world invaded, they had no defenses left. This pattern has repeated itself into the modern era, though in different forms. As societies have become increasingly sterile, new health challenges have emerged, not infectious diseases, but disorders of immunity itself. Conditions where the immune system attacks the body it was meant to protect, allergies triggered by harmless substances, inflammatory responses without apparent cause. These are not the diseases of filth. They are the diseases of cleanliness. They are the costs of removing ourselves from the biological context in which we evolved. None of this means that modern sanitation is wrong, or that we should return to living in conditions our ancestors would recognize. The advances of modern hygiene have saved countless lives and continue to do so. The water we drink and the food we eat are safer than at any point in human history. This is genuine progress, purchased at tremendous cost over many generations. But understanding the paradox of cleanliness reminds us that progress is never simple. Every solution creates new problems. Every protection has its price. The same innovations that shield us from ancient threats expose us to novel ones. The same cleanliness that prevents contamination may weaken the systems evolved to fight it. Our ancestors, crawling through the dirt of their primitive shelters, hosting parasites in their guts, drinking water that would send a modern person to the hospital, they were not simply surviving despite their conditions. They were surviving because of them. Their bodies were in constant conversation with the microbial world, learning its languages, building defenses, maintaining a balance that had been refined over millions of years of evolution. We have interrupted that conversation. We have silenced one side of the dialogue. And while the immediate benefits are obvious: fewer infections, longer lives, reduced suffering, the long-term consequences are only beginning to emerge. The child in that ancient shelter, her face streaked with grime, her hands black with dirt, would grow up to be stronger than most modern humans in at least one crucial respect. Her immune system, trained from birth by endless exposure, would be capable of responses we can barely imagine. She could tolerate pathogens that would overwhelm a contemporary child. She could fight off infections that modern medicine might struggle to treat. She did not know this, of course. She did not understand immunity or microbiology or the complex dance between host and pathogen. She simply lived her life as her ancestors had for thousands of generations before her, in intimate contact with the biological world. And in that intimacy, she found a form of protection that no amount of soap could provide. This is the strange truth that history reveals. Survival has never been about eliminating danger. It has been about learning to coexist with it. Our bodies are not fortresses designed to keep the world out. They are ecosystems designed to incorporate it, to negotiate with it, to find balance within the endless complexity of life. For most of human existence, we understood this instinctively. We lived with the dirt, with the parasites, with the invisible forces that surrounded us at every moment. We did not fear them because we had never known anything else. And in that lack of fear, in that constant exposure, we developed the resilience that allowed our species to conquer the earth. When we began to clean our world, we gained many things. But we also lost something precious, a connection to the biological reality that shaped us, an engagement with the microbial forces that trained our defenses, a balance that evolution had spent millions of years perfecting. The early humans who lived in conditions we find unimaginable were not primitive in the way we sometimes assume. They were adapted, they were balanced, they were capable of survival in ways that our cleaner, safer, more sterile world has made us forget. And in that forgetting, we may have lost more than we realize.